Fan games have always been a gray area of legality. Small teams or even individuals outside of the bounds of an original product's creator can put in countless hours of work to a passion project to expound upon the gameplay or story of a pre-established franchise simply for the sake of more of that kind of product existing in the world. However, the repercussions of using copyrighted material you don't own to make media, even for free, tends to be swift and severe. Many a fan game has been ceased and or desisted by the owners of the copyrighted material, disappearing from all but the darkest corners of the net. It doesn't matter how much love or time or resources were pumped into it, if the company isn't making money off of the way the IP is being used, they'll typically see no reason for that fan game to exist. Some companies, however, have capitalized on the desire for fan-produced games based on their titles. Most notably, Valve, owners of classic IPs such as Half-Life, Counter-Strike, and Portal, have provided users with an avenue to release their fan games directly on Steam for free or for cost. Sometimes this leads to cute little free side stories or titles which teeter the point between fan game, remake, and overhaul, like Black Mesa. Highly recommended, by the way. Other times, you get a Hunt Down the Freeman, a train wreck that needs no introduction. Highly recommended, by the way, to avoid like it's quarantined until the end of time. However, I'd argue no Valve fan game, and perhaps no fan game at all, has reached the same level of quality of self-contained completeness as Portal Stories Mel. Developed and self-published by Prism Game Studios and released in 2015, nearly 5 years old at this point, Mel is an officially approved mod of Portal 2, but by all appearances and functionality is its own fully featured title. With its own Steam store page, installer, and everything, this isn't the kind of mod that takes hours of browsing through forums to install. It just launches like any other game on Steam. That's the beauty of Valve's lax stance and even encouragement of community-made mods for their games. Portal Stories Mel takes place before and between the events of Portal 1 and 2, and despite not being officially canon, it fits perfectly into the narrative of Half-Life and Portal's shared universe. Unless Valve says otherwise, although at this rate, it seems they never will. I guess that's my main point I'll be making throughout this video. You may be wondering why I'm talking about a 5-year-old fan mod for Portal 2. It's not like I've recently discovered it or anything, I first played it several years back. However, I want to bring more attention to what I'd consider the best fan game ever produced. One which rivals and in some ways, in my opinion, surpasses the source material upon which it's based. Unless Valve finally steps up to do something noteworthy with their IPs, building metaphorical bridges rather than actual ones, the fans are the closest thing we'll get to fleshing out the Valveoverse. So, while many focus on the long-lost story of Half-Life 2 Episode 3 or Half-Life 3 or whatever the hell, I think it'd be worth highlighting how Portal Stories Mel effectively constitutes everything I could hope for from an official title. Unless by some miracle we get a new first-party entry in the franchise, it's the closest thing we'll ever get to Portal 3. The game opens on a similar note to Half-Life 1 and 2, with the protagonist, Mel, catching a ride on a train through a grand complex, except instead of Black Mesa or City 17, we're catching glimpses of Aperture Science circa 1952. Pre-apocalypse, pre-neurotoxin, with living humans bumbling about, making science from scratch. All the while, a pre-recorded message from Portal 2's memorable Cave Johnson will play. But of course, J.K. Simmons wasn't available to reprise his role for this small company's fan game. It was scheduling conflicts, I'm sure. But a rather convincing impressionist is doing their damnedest to play the part, and this is helped along further by the writing being on point.
All right, you're now arriving at Aperture Central Station. Wait. Chris, get over here. How do you spell station? Okay, think about that for a second. Okay. Does station have an extra O before the I? Alright, listen to me. Pack your things. Because you're fired! Get out of my office. Out. Get out. Out of my office. Oh, I can't re-record this.
Little details like this are what bring Mel from being a cute fan game to what I'd consider a full-blown entry in the franchise. It's not trying something ridiculous like, what if it's Portal? But edgy. They already captured the tone, the humor, the atmosphere of the franchise perfectly. Perhaps in some ways, better. More on that later, and they're using it as a baseboard to tell their own original story. Speaking of, I by no means intend to spoil the entirety of the game through this video, but I will be giving an overview of its content and narrative, so if you're looking to try the title for yourself, now would be a good time to go do that. It's completely free on Steam, provided you own Portal 2, and linked below. If we're all good, I'll continue. You're playing as the titular Mel, an Olympian turned test subject who's tasked with trial running a sleep chamber in an underground city. Of course, knowing Aperture Science, it goes flawlessly and nothing bad ever happens. Waking up several decades later into a destroyed post-apocalyptic death trap is purely coincidental. Upon waking up and seeing the state of the facility you've been trapped in, you're directed to secure a portal gun to escape. And here's where I want to step out of the path of the story to talk about the mindset of fan game development for a second. It's an interesting scenario to find yourself in, building an entire game on the shoulders of a well-known title, as you are completely safe and in the right to assume anyone who's playing your fan game has played the original. Therefore, you don't have to hold the player's hand whilst introducing them to the game's shared mechanics. That said, other factors such as getting yourself in the right headspace for the genre, the amount of time it's been since a player has partaken in the original title, and ease of leaning people into your take on it can make the opening stages of a fan game rather tricky to balance. You don't want to make a bare-bones, monotonous tutorial, as the title your fan game is based on has already done that, and in Portal's case especially, pretty much as well as you're going to do. Anyone who's played Portal 1 or 2 knows how a portal gun works and will understand the general gameplay mechanics of the genre. Going over it again every step of the way will simply prove boring and unnecessary. That said, you don't want to simply forego an introduction altogether, give players a somewhat difficult puzzle, and go, begin, start, test. They're likely to feel rushed, confused, even if they already understand how Portal 2 plays, giving them no room to breathe in the opening act. Mel's introduction strikes a balance not often seen in fan games, which I find does a perfect job of easing players into the world of science once more. You're given an overview of the setting during the tram segment, some free roam to get used to the controls in the underground city, and then just a few minutes in, you're given a portal gun. They don't bother only allowing you to use one color of portal as the official games do at first, because that would slow things down. Nor do they start you off with a device from the get-go, because that would be too hasty. Simple, momentum-based puzzles and movement headline the escape from the underground city, giving the player plenty of time to get comfortable with testing if need be, or speed right along if they're ready to get into the meat of things. And as you progress through the game, you'll encounter a wide array of puzzles, from those outside of the testing track made to feel more natural in the environment, to various eras of specifically designed test chambers, as is tradition. Regardless of how the puzzle is presented, Portal Stories Mel manages to get the most important aspect of Portal gameplay right: difficult but logical puzzles. I never found myself walking into a chamber going, oh, that's what I do, and leaving immediately, as could be the case with fan-made maps on the workshop, for instance. Nor was I stuck scratching my head for tens of minutes on end, completely stumped and frustrated by a lack of direction or clarity. Taking time to look around, thinking about how features interact with one another, and experimenting with different portal placements, gel combinations, and physics will handily get you through every level in the base game. However, those looking for real stumpers, puzzles to mull over, will find comfort in the advanced difficulty, which swaps out key aspects of puzzles throughout the entire title for more complex and sometimes obtuse ones. I was unable to beat the game on this difficulty, as it'd take me well over an hour for some puzzles, but if that's the kind of challenge you're looking for, the option is right there available for you. Regardless of what difficulty you're on, a consistent theme throughout Mel's test chambers, and indeed its environments inside Aperture but outside of the testing track, are puzzles that experiment with mechanical combinations Portal 2 never had the chance to get around to or just barely touched on, such as using water like gel to extinguish fires, or using hard light bridges covered in gel at ridiculous angles. It feels like a lot of these puzzles were made with specific interactions or solutions in mind from the start, but were then developed backwards into more complex brain stumpers. That said, by no means did I feel railroaded into one solution. Sometimes I would find clever solutions that were clearly outside of the bounds of what the game had intended, but I wasn't stopped simply for finding the wrong solution. All roads led to Rome. Of course, sometimes glitchy or funky looking side effects of these mechanics remind me why Portal 2 strayed away from them in the first place. That said, the standard of quality for a free fan mod is at the point where minor visual oddities can easily be overlooked. I'd clock the game's campaign at around 7 to 8 hours, give or take depending on how good you are at puzzle solving, and far more if you try advanced mode. All the while, you're encouraged and accompanied by the friendly and fantastically acted core Virgil. Mel, much like Chell, is a silent protagonist, but Virgil acts as a voice of guidance, much like Wheatley did in the first few acts of Portal 2, although far more competently and kindly. Now, here's something I realized throughout the course of replaying Portal and Portal 2 just prior to making this video. The humor in those games, while still entertaining if you can ignore the years of memes aging it, is often just plain mean. Like, I don't mean to get too into the weeds on this, but the default source of comedy throughout most of Portal 2 is fat-shaming, insulting orphans, poking fun at brain damage. It's meant to be crude, obviously, but it grows weary quickly without some kind of retort or contrast to lighten the mood. And while Wheatley had the opportunity to be the rebuttal, the course the story took quickly makes him just as insulting and aggressive as GLaDOS. Portal Story's Mel, on the other hand, manages to capture the sort of ridiculous and dangerous atmosphere and tone of Portal 2's humor, as I mentioned earlier. However, instead of resorting to insults as their default form of comedy, it finds humor in kinder places. The meanest it ever gets is Virgil finding himself upset with Mel over her lack of strength needed to open a heavy-duty door, despite her being an actual Olympian. And even then, he actively apologizes for his outburst later on.
Well, great. You can fling yourself all over the place and get past some old turrets that are firing live rounds, but you can't get a door open? What kind of Olympian are you? Alright, let's see what we can do.
This isn't so much a knock against Portal 2 or Valve as it is a praise of Prism Games' willingness to work harder at its comedy. The story provides excellent structure and closure as well, instead of the cynical abruptness of Portal 1 and 2's endings. I'll fully admit that Aegis, the game's antagonist, is by all accounts boring and forgettable compared to the crude but ever memorable GLaDOS. That said, the focus of the game's narrative is not all around its antagonist. If anything, Aegis is simply a means to keep the player around long enough to build Mel and Virgil's friendship, as well as tell contextual and environmental stories about Aperture Laboratories, fitting given the title of Portal Stories. In order to accomplish this, the most effort and budget was put where it needed to be: the environments, the art style, the music, and the voice acting. The stylish 50s era portal gun, for instance, was by no means necessary for gameplay, but it sets the mood perfectly for the place Mel has found herself trapped in. Virgil's voice actor fills the character with life, personality necessary to give to the character will be sticking with you for your entire adventure, and the soundtrack alone sets the stage for Portal Story's Mel to, hopefully, capture your imagination and attention as much as it did for me. With a campaign as long, if not longer, than Portal 1 or 2, a story and gameplay which explores new takes on pre-established ideas in this world, an aesthetic and sound which completely enthralled me, and a simply overall upbeat setting that still doesn't shy away from dropping heavy concepts on you. Portal Story's Mel offers me everything I could ever ask for from a third entry in this franchise, all for free. If you're even remotely interested in trying out Portal Story's Mel, all you need is Steam and to own Portal 2. It doesn't even have to be installed. If you've been waiting on Portal 3 all these years like I have, well, essentially, here it is. And if you're looking to financially support the developers, Prism Game Studios, they have an original title in the form of The Captives, a dungeon crawler of sorts. Both games will be linked in the description below. And while you're down there, maybe you could consider subscribing? I'm doing my best to get some new and interesting videos out there, so I'd love if you'd stick around for the ride. Either way, thank you so much for watching, have a good day, and take it easy.